On This Week in Enterprise Tech, China's got a new mega chip, DOS by fire. Windows celebrates its 30th anniversary. Your security cameras may be spying on you. And encryption. Try it on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Enterprise Tech is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Twit. This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 167, recorded November 20th, 2015. Encryption, the IoT, and other mythical beasts. This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by ZipRecruiter. Are you hiring? With ZipRecruiter.com, you can post to 100-plus job sites, including social networks, all with a single click. Screen, rate, and hire the right candidates fast. Try ZipRecruiter with a free 4-day trial now at ZipRecruiter.com/Twit. Welcome to Twit. This Week in Enterprise Tech. It's the show dedicated to the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how the world is connected. I'm your host, Father Robert Ballecer, the digital Jesuit, your guide to all things in the enterprise. And I'm joined by my regular co-host, my cast of characters, partners in crime, really, starting with Mr. Brian Chee, the director of the Advanced Network Computing Laboratory in Honolulu, Hawaii. Brian, how is the Geek in Paradise, and what are you playing with? Those look like little bits.
Yes, they are. I'm actually tinkering with little bits. My loving wife bought one for me. She had all kinds of discounts she could stack. Oh. And I'm going to start prototyping a replacement control system for my hot tub because I'm tired of the hot tub OEM boards constantly burning out.
You know, that could be a know-how project. Of course, in order for us to test that, Cranky Hippo and I would have to come out to Hawaii.
Yeah, I think that would be a great project.
Let's do that. Now, a man who doesn't spend much time in a hot tub, not because he doesn't like it, but because he's just too tall to fit, is Mr. Curtis Franklin from Information Week Radio. Curtis, you're at a conference right now, correct?
That is correct, Padre. I am at FaucetCon in Orlando. This is the free and open source software and technology conference. Seeing all kinds of free and open source software goodness and meeting a fair number of Twit and Twit Network fans. They send their regards, and this is a shout out to all of them who are probably going to be listening to the podcast version, but having a lot of fun just geeking out with lots of free software folks.
Yeah, big shout out to all the FaucetCon folk. And also, special note at the top of the show, a special shout out to Microsoft Windows. Version 1.0 was released 30 years ago today. So everyone's operating system that everyone hates and yet most people use has turned the big 3.0. Let's go ahead and jump straight into the blips. Now, when you think of the chip-making superpowers, there are a couple of names that jump to the front of your mind. Intel, Samsung, and Qualcomm. Together, those big three, well, they account for almost $380 billion in market capitalization. Their foundries pump out silicon that is found in everything from the latest in networking switching to the fastest in supercomputers to the smartest of mobile devices. But now, we may now have a new player. Tsinghua Unigroup Limited has announced plans to invest $47 billion in their silicon production capabilities over the next 5 years in an attempt to wrest third place from Qualcomm. That amount is staggering, considering that Tsinghua, which had 2014 revenue of $1.2 billion, is now planning to invest an amount that is just shy of Intel's $51 billion in 2014 revenue. Playing for a larger share of the $355 billion global chip market, Tsinghua has been on a spending spree of late, making almost $10 billion in strategic acquisitions and investments in companies like Western Digital, PowerTech, as well as an attempted $23 billion takeover of Micron Technology. Tsinghua is, as you might have suspected, strongly supported by the Chinese government, who is looking to reduce the country's dependence on foreign firms for semiconductors. The first battlefield will most likely be the NAND industry, a highly competitive field with razor-thin margins where the top 5 players control 90% of the market.
Want to hire the best employees? Let a computer be your recruiter. According to a National Bureau of Economic Research study released this week, machines make better hiring recommendations than people, at least when it comes to low-skilled workers. The study examined the hiring of almost 300,000 low-skilled service sector workers, such as call center operators and data entry clerks, at 15 companies. Employees hired based on algorithmic recommendations had job tenures that lasted 15% longer than people hired without the testing. The researchers conclude managers systematically make hiring decisions that are not in the interest of the firm. Since the low-skilled jobs evaluated in this study are among those most likely to be automated, the possibility exists that the optimal hiring situation in the future will be one where computers hire other computers.
Seems Georgia sent out some very personal information on 6 million voters, and there's a class action suit revving up. In a truly bozo no-no move, the Secretary of State, Brian Kemp, set out several CDs containing personal information on around 6 million Georgia voters. So instead of someone breaking into a place like OPM to get this kind of PII treasure trove, Georgia sent this information out to media organizations, political parties, and other groups that include the Georgia Gun Owner magazine. My comment is that this was truly a bozo no-no.
This past Monday, 90% of the networks in Azerbaijan lost internet connectivity after some old cables at a Delta Telecom colo caught fire and downed the facility. Azerbaijan has seen rapid deployment since its Soviet days, thanks in part to its abundant gas and oil reserves, and network infrastructure has been deployed at a record pace. But unfortunately, the Delta Telecom data center was a single point of failure for the vast majority of networks in country. The failure downed everything from point-of-sale terminals to government agencies to consumer connectivity. Service was mostly restored within 8 hours, and that had enough failover capacity to keep the country-wide outage from affecting the international traffic that flows through Azerbaijan. But the incident has shown a dramatic weakness in the country's telecom, which will have to be addressed as it joins the Trans-Eurasian Information Highway. Closer to home, as information is released about the event, it's an interesting failover exercise for any business that depends on its networks.
The CCIE program is changing. Cisco is updating its Certified Internetwork Expert, CCIE program to make sure that those who earn the certification know a thing or two about emerging technologies in addition to having traditional networking skills. Beginning in July, the written exam will be updated so that 10% of it covers evolving technologies such as SDN, DevOps, automation, and cloud. The new framework also is based on unified written and lab blueprints so that candidates can demonstrate holistic knowledge. Other CCIE exams will be updated to incorporate the updated framework when they come up for refresh. Cisco is also updating its Certified Design Expert, or CCDE program, to the framework. It's also updating its Certified Network Associate Security, CCNA program, to expand its focus from network security. Training and exams will now also cover technologies and trends such as BYOD, cloud security, and virtualization.
The FCC Chair Wheeler calls T-Mobile's binge on pro-competition and pro-innovation. Chairman Wheeler's comment was, clearly this meets both of those criteria. It's highly innovative and highly competitive, especially since the streaming vendors do not pay T-Mobile for this, but instead T-Mobile is claiming that any streaming vendor can participate if they're willing to co-locate a connection point on the T-Mobile network. So while we did talk about this last week, this is a topic that's going to linger on for a while, and I, for one, would love to see something like a porn network or someone else that tests T-Mobile's resolve to approach T-Mobile just to see if T-Mobile is more than just talk.
Bow chicka bow wow. Google what? So you finally got your 1 gigabit per second fiber internet, and you're feeling pretty good about yourself, right? Well, the biggest pipes on the block, the crazy fast speeds that you long for, and you own the internet. At least you did, until a UK broadband ISP announced a 5 gigabit per second internet service plan. Available in early 2016, GigaClear will be offering all of their business and consumer customers 5 gigabits per second of synchronous bandwidth, more than 1,000 times faster than the average UK connection. Citing a Cisco report that UK traffic has increased fivefold over the past 5 years and will grow 23% each year until 2019, GigaClear CEO Matthew Hare admits that 5 gigabits per second seems excessive, but he is confident that multi-gig connectivity will be not only commonplace, but expected in very short order. The relatively fast rollout of the service is possible because GigaClear already has a large fiber-to-the-premise network in place, meaning that interested customers only need to replace their network interface with no infrastructure improvements required. Home packages will start at £399 a month, with business packages running at $1,500. Well, that does it for the blips. Next up, we're doing 2 deep dives. That's right. We've got some issues that we need cleared up in the enterprise world. Specifically, we want to take a look at the prickly issue of encryption, and we also want to look at the possibility that your CCTV networks have been owned. But before we do that, let's go ahead and take a moment to thank the first sponsor of this episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech. And you know what? This goes out to all you business owners, or for the people out there who hire for the businesses you work for. Now, you know that the people you hire, your employees, will determine the success or failure of your business. Posting jobs in one place isn't enough to find those quality candidates, those who have not just the skills, but also the temperament to work in the environment of your office. Well, thanks to ZipRecruiter.com, you can now post to 100-plus job sites with one single click and be instantly matched to candidates from over 6 million resumes. Just listen to Dan. He's an actual ZipRecruiter client, and he wrote, "The hardest part about running a business when you need to hire is that you have to spend extra time recruiting while you're short-staffed. But with ZipRecruiter, I've gotten quality candidates within 24 hours of posting a job. ZipRecruiter's website makes this process so much faster by letting me manage candidates in one place. Just post once, and within 24 hours, watch your candidates roll into ZipRecruiter's easy-to-use interface. ZipRecruiter has been used by over 400,000 businesses, and you can try it now for free. Getting the right people for your company is so important. Do you really want to leave it up to chance? Today, you can try ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, for free. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/Twiet. That's ZipRecruiter.com/Twiet. And we thank ZipRecruiter for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. We welcome to the show Mr. Craig Young. He is a senior security researcher at Tripwire, VERT. Craig, thank you very much for coming onto the show.
Hi, thank you.
Could you explain for the folks playing along at home, what is Tripwire VERT?
So Tripwire VERT is the vulnerability exposure research arm of Tripwire. We analyze vulnerabilities that are coming out in products and determine how to detect these vulnerabilities on enterprise and consumer networks in our IP360 product. And we also offer other risk management tools, including file integrity monitoring and change control.
And you have a very interesting perspective on the encryption issue. We've been seeing a lot of, well, incendiary words, a couple of arguments, especially leading back to terrorism over the last couple of weeks, that has a lot of people thinking that if you don't want a backdoor to encryption, or if you don't want to make encryption illegal, you don't like freedom. You're caught right in the middle of this, right?
Yeah, certainly. And I have some strong feelings on that. Certainly, I think that we've seen in this past year some of the consequences that happen when government steps in and mandates dilution of security protocols like encryption. The export-grade cipher requirements from the 1990s have bit us with practical attacks twice now in the past 12 months.
Right. Oh, there have been interesting stories over the past 3 years, all pertaining to the government trying to mandate some sort of encryption control. And I understand the issues. I mean, I'm not one of these people who does knee-jerk and say, well, no, you can't touch my encryption whatsoever. I understand the issues of a government investigative industry, let's call it, wanting to get access to the information that might help them with their investigation. You've got the FBI, the CIA, the NSA all saying, if there's encryption in place that we can't break, it makes our job much harder. But there's been a change in the winds the last couple of months. On October 1st, we talked about a story of Director James B. Comey of the FBI getting up in front of Congress and saying, at this time, we're not pushing for a bill. We don't want a law to mandate a backdoor to encryption, but we would like companies, especially those in the Silicon Valley, to do it voluntarily. We would like them to see the better part of freedom and give us access to the data that they may have stored on their servers and give us a backdoor into their encryption. What has been your stance on that?
Well, I mean, if you take the major providers of communication services and you get them to backdoor or give law enforcement access to those encrypted communications, I don't think that's really going to do anything to increase the amount of valuable intelligence that law enforcement is going to be able to obtain. The fact of the matter is that terrorists particularly have been keen on using not just encryption, but other techniques such as physical couriers and steganography, hiding messages within porn images and other images being put on image file sharing sites. And we've seen that even since the Snowden disclosures, there have been numerous terror plots in Europe that have been foiled. So I think that it's a very tough argument to make to try and say that the fact that law enforcement can't get into these encrypted services makes it that they're so-called dark. I think that's a tenuous argument. And if we do get these providers to give access, there's nothing to stop jihadist groups from using homebrewed apps. I mean, the cat is out of the bag, so to speak, with encryption, and there's no way to put that back in. The tools are out there. Anybody who wants to can make an application that's going to use strong cryptography. So in the end, the people who are really trying to do harm, they're probably not going to be using these primary services that the US government might be able to get companies to backdoor for them.
I've got a quote here from Dwayne Mellison, who is your CTO, the CTO of Tripwire. And I think it's actually a really good summary of some of the issues that we're talking about. He writes, "The reality is that declaring encryption to be illegal won't stop people from using it. All crime is illegal, and every day in the news we see the extraordinary lengths people go in order to get around those restrictions. Furthermore, a ban on encryption would be completely ineffective at improving national security unless other nations follow suit. And I don't see that happening anytime soon. Instead, the collateral damage on an encryption ban could inflict on national economies and on consumer privacy is hard to estimate." I want to bring in my co-host here. Chee, this is one of those sticky parts, because it's difficult to stand up, especially when something has just happened like we had in Paris, and say, this won't help. We know it won't help. So why do you keep pushing for it? Without being seen as a kook. But isn't he right? I mean, Dwayne's right. When he says that this encryption, a ban on encryption is not going to stop its use, that's something that we all kind of know as IT people, folk, don't we?
Yeah, and this is someone's knee-jerk reaction. Like someone just said in the chat room, this is Clipper chip all over. I'm sorry, the criminals will use whatever criminals need to use. All this is going to do is it's going to make it easier for competitors to hack their competition. It's not going to make a huge amount of difference for terrorism, but it's going to make a huge difference in industrial espionage. So I think it's actually counterproductive, if you ask me.
Curtis, something that Craig mentioned was the fact that, and I'm going to paraphrase here, you can't outlaw math. That's what encryption is. Encryption is math. And to say that we're going to outlaw the encryption of communications so that we can catch the bad guys is, I mean, if you rephrase it to say we're going to stop people from doing math so we can catch the bad guys, that just sounds crazy, doesn't it?
It does indeed. And it's important to note that any strategy that depends upon the stupidity of your adversary is a bad strategy. Now, if they do stupid things, then you certainly can take advantage of it. But to depend on it puts you in the same level of intelligence as you would say that your opponent has. And so for us to say, well, if we take away these commercially available apps that the kids like to use, then all the terrorist networks will fall apart is naive at best and sort of disingenuous in the most evil sort of way at worst. I think a lot of people get at a very visceral level the fact that any encryption scheme that has a hole in it is broken. We have seen in so many different circumstances the fact that if you have a backdoor with a key, even if you say the key will be kept in secure hands, it will get out. Let's just remember the TSA lock debacle where one of our handy TSA folks held up the key ring showing everyone what the shapes were. That kind of thing will happen. And as Cheebert said, the big thing this does, if it goes through, if people do have to have encryption with a backdoor, it means that suddenly none of the secure communications for American or international business or private individuals is safe anymore.
Craig, I do like the example of the TSA keys. That's actually, yes, that's what we expect when we trust a government with universal keys to any sort of security. But why is it that you think it is so difficult for politicians, and I'll even say presidential candidates because they're all jumping on the bandwagon here, to understand that adding a backdoor to encryption fundamentally breaks the encryption? I mean, that's something that's grasped so easily by the people who follow the tech, and yet for politicians and policymakers, they seem not to make that connection.
I think that it's just a bit of beyond the technical grasp of most of the people in Washington. You don't have a real great physical analogy. I mean, you can try and associate encryption with a lock and key, but that analogy breaks down pretty quickly. And frankly, we have a lot of people in our government who aren't going to read even a 10-page bill. So trying to get them to understand the intricacies of cryptography, it's almost an exercise in futility, I think.
Craig, let's go ahead and dive in, because we've been dancing around Paris, and Paris is it's the flashpoint for a lot of this. Yes, we've had a lot of debate on encryption and whether or not we should make it illegal for companies to have encryption that cannot be broken by the government. But what we saw after the mandatory 24 hours of mourning for the events in Paris was every agency, not just from the United States, but also in France and in Great Britain, saying, well, this is why we need a backdoor to encryption. And there was actually even a story that leaked out and then became sort of the Bible of those pushing for better encryption backdoors, saying that the terrorists were using Rot 13 encryption, and that's why we need a backdoor into it. And since then, we found out that was actually bull. That's not true. The terrorists were using smartphones with their messages being sent in clear text. But it is interesting. Every time we have an incident like this, there is the hue and the cry for more access to communications data by intelligence agencies, even as we're also getting a report that says that these intelligence agencies can't actually handle the flood of information. So what is it that they want? I mean, when they push for either no encryption or encryption that they can break, what do they actually want access to, knowing that they don't have the capabilities to sort through every bit of communications that runs through the world's networks?
Well, I think that if you look at, for example, the United States NSA, what they want is access to everything, the ability to catalog any kind of data that's going to traverse any kind of network. And the problem with this mentality is that, as you're pointing out, this is not a SIGINT problem that allowed these Paris attacks to happen. Intelligence agencies were aware of most of these attackers being radicals, having histories of violence and plotting attacks. There were even warnings, it's my understanding, from Iraqi intelligence that there was an impending attack coming on. So instead, there is so much data that they have that they cannot sort through it and recognize what the credible threats are and act on them in any kind of reasonable manner. So they have this desire to get all of the data, but yeah, they haven't shown the ability to do anything with this massive amount of data other than store it and perhaps abuse it.
So this is a big question, and you probably don't have an answer for it, but what's the compromise? I mean, what can we do to give these agencies more of the capabilities that they need, assuming that there are safeguards that are in place in order to keep them from abusing their power? What can we give them to do those investigations without fundamentally damaging the security that we should all expect when we communicate?
Well, the alternative to diluting the encryption or placing backdoor keys in, of course, would be that any encryption is worthless if the endpoints have been compromised. So as much as I don't really like to promote this as a solution, but the use of zero-day exploits is one possibility here. The controlled use of zero-day exploits to compromise edge devices that are being used by the jihadists or other criminal actors.
Cheebert, that's a sticky subject, the compromise of the edge. And actually, we heard that from Mr. Gear 2 years ago at Black Hat. The whole idea that you don't need to own the core if you've got your hands around the edge. But that's true, correct? I mean, again, I know that Craig's not saying that that's what we ought to do. We should get the government to invest in 0 days so that they can own all the endpoints. But in an imperfect world, that seems a better solution than weakening encryption at its core.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I actually take a very different approach to this. There already is an organization that's trying to grow, trying to build the human networks, so that once a court says yes, let's do this, very, very little time is spent just fussing around trying to put the infrastructure in place to be able to get access to this data. InfraGard is an organization dedicated towards building the human networks and building a trust relationship between the private sector and the federal government. I think it's a very good program because it's an opt-in, not an opt-out. It's an opt-in program. And most corporations are willing to play ball if the federal government is willing to be nice about it. And so here in Honolulu, I've heard of other places, there have been cases where the FBI has asked very nicely, even before the court order was done, and the corporation says, oh my God, yes, we'd love to be able to help. I think that's a much, much better solution than for us to break the edge.
Let's bring that over to Curtis. Curtis, it has been suggested, both by the directors of the FBI, the CIA, and the NSA, that Silicon Valley should cooperate. And that's a very nice way of saying, we would prefer that you just help us with our investigations rather than us having to force our way into your network. In fact, that's also been suggested by several of the presidential candidates, that there needs to be a closer cooperation between the government and the tech industry. Is that really a viable thing, though? I mean, can you really ask for corporations that handle sensitive customer data every day to cooperate with the federal government and never tell anybody about it?
I think the tough part there is the never telling anyone about it. Most of the major corporations who handle data let everyone know that if they are presented with a valid court order or subpoena, then they will turn over the data that is requested. Now, what is happening in many cases is that they are not themselves ever holding the decryption keys. So they can hand over encrypted data, but that's about it. The issue for these Silicon Valley firms is that the government, by and large, doesn't pay their bills. The customers do. And therefore, they have a very real business interest in making the customers feel as secure as possible. We've seen what happens with international business when customers don't feel secure. There are many, many companies in Europe who will not trust their data to any US-based cloud computing firm. That would happen on a North American basis if all of a sudden it was made known that anytime the government asked with a secret subpoena, the companies would have to turn over decrypted information and never let you know it happened. If you really want to end cloud computing as we know it, that would be a pretty good tactic.
Craig, I want to go back to you. We only have a few minutes left in this segment, but where do you see this battleground shaping up? Because, I mean, it's not going to go away. There's going to be continued calls for the ability to read communications, and there will be continued calls from the other side saying, no, you have no right to our communications. Where will the battles be fought in 2016? This is all going to come to a head. We have to assume that there's going to be further events that will give fire to this issue, to this bonfire of encryption. What do you expect to see?
I think that there will be, at least in some cases, a protracted legal battle over these types of questions, and we might even see the Supreme Court weighing in on what's appropriate here. Beyond that, I can't really say. I'm not sure.
I think that's probably the best wisdom we can get. Craig, I want to thank you for joining us. You are a senior researcher at Tripwire at Vert. Could you please tell the folks, if they want to find your work, if they want to find the work of Tripwire, if they want to see what your company has been doing in the area of security, where can they go? Where should they find you?
You can go to tripwire.com/vert, and there is direct access to some of the research that we do on that page. We also have the State of Security blog. You can look for me on there specifically. I have a number of posts detailing what we've been doing in Vert. And you can also check us out at conferences. I'm speaking at DEF CON pretty regularly, and we speak at various other conferences and do a hack lab periodically.
I'll see you at the next DEF CON. Look for me and my co-host, Brian Burnett, the Cranky Hippo. We normally hang out in the hardware hacking village. Just look for the guys with the quadcopters.
Will do.
Okay. Greg Young, thank you again for joining us. We'll have you back again because this issue isn't going to go away, and I'd like to keep Tripwire close to my breast pocket so we can call upon your expertise.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Joining us now on a separate but related topic is Mr. Tim Matthews, VP of Marketing at Incapsula. Craig, thank you very much for joining us.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Oh, actually, I should say Imperva now because Incapsula was purchased, was it not?
That's correct.
Yes,
we were
yes.
purchased a little over a year ago now.
Yeah, and actually, I think the last time you were on was about a year ago, episode 110. So it's nice to have you back on the show.
Thank you.
We have you here because your company found, a very interesting botnet developing. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, so one of our customers was attacked by a pretty low-volume DDoS attack. And as is always the case, our researchers went and tried to understand the origin of the attack. And they were surprised to find two things. First of all, that the attack came from a botnet of closed-circuit TV cameras or CCTV cameras. And the other surprise was that one of them was located in the shopping mall 5 minutes down the street from our office.
Could you do me a favor? Could you adjust your mic a tiny bit because it's rubbing on the wire? But yeah, while you're doing that, what are the implications of CCTV cameras being botnetted?
Well, it's interesting. I think most people think about servers being compromised or maybe even home PCs being compromised. But as we're moving into this era of the Internet of Things, you now have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, eventually millions of devices that can be compromised and mount these massive DDoS attacks. And I think that, ironically, security cameras are supposed to keep us safe. But in this case, the camera was doing its job for physical surveillance, but was being used by the criminals to actually mount cyber attacks on unknowing victims around the world.
It's interesting because when you think of malicious actors attacking CCTV cameras, your first thought might be, oh, well, they want access to the video feeds. They want to be able to see what's on the video recorders.
Right.
But what you found is, no, it's just these are really easy devices to own, and now they have extra bandwidth that they can use to attack.
Exactly right. These are very well-connected devices. If you think about it, these are sending video or at least images over the internet, so they've got good connections. They're wide open. They're typically not monitored on a daily basis. People, install them and they're up in the corner of a building somewhere, and that's it. It's actually the ultimate cover for a piece of malware to hide inside of a security camera. Right.
I want to bring Chee into this. Chee, we spoke about this on Twight not too long ago when we had Atmail on the show, and there has been a growing concern over the last 6 months as the explosion of the Internet of Things has actually happened. It's no longer talking about it. We're starting to see devices in the wild that use quick prototyping hardware to get out into the market, give us very interesting features, everything from internet-connected refrigerators to, again, security cameras. And now we've got this big pullback because security wasn't even an afterthought. It wasn't even something they added on. There are a lot of devices out there that have no layers of security whatsoever. And this has sort of become the legacy of the Internet of Things, yes?
Yes, indeed. In fact, one of the guys in the chat room, HiWeb, is a friend, is a acquaintance of mine. He's actually helping build a private APN for me. The biggest problem I see with a lot of monitoring systems, a lot of Internet of Things is, yes, indeed, no big thought on security. So to work around it, some of the systems I'm working with don't even have the capability of encrypted uploads or downloads, and it's really frustrating. So what we're doing is actually securing the communications path so that people can't even get to it unless you're on my network. And my network is very well locked down, thank you. I'm strongly encouraging people out in the world that if you are playing in the Internet of Things, don't ignore security. You know, do a risk assessment. I'm actually doing some stuff for the U.S. Navy, and one of the things they're asking me for is a risk assessment. And I am saying, hey, a lot of it is dependent upon how much your thing can do. So if you have a high bandwidth connection into your CCTVs, that means it can do some serious damage if it's let loose. And more of these Internet of Things are having their foundation on a general purpose computer like an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi or something similar, you know, and those things can be compromised if you don't pay attention to security.
Tim, we've got PH in the chat room who's asking, why is it that these weren't behind a router? Why weren't they behind a NAT? And I think that's what a lot of home users would think. But as you start to see more and more of these cases, why are they directly connected to the Internet?
You know, I think it's because these devices are typically managed by a contractor and they need to be remotely accessible. We found the malware not only mounting DDoS attacks, but scanning the network for other similar devices that could speak Telnet or SSH. And so I think that, you know, people who install these cameras want to maintain them remotely, and they leave them wide open for maintenance purposes, but they're, you know, available to the attackers without being properly protected. In some cases, these aren't really proper networks per se. They're in a shopping mall, in a small business. They're just not, they're not thinking about the implications. I think most people don't even think about a camera as something that could actually have malware inside of it. I think that's a concept that's only beginning to dawn on people.
Right. And actually, we've got PS Chops in the chat room who's pointing out to one of my favorite motherboard articles, talking about how easy it is to own medical equipment. I've actually spent a lot of time in hospitals, and I remember the first time I did an Nmap scan of the network subnet that I was on, and I found about a dozen APC power supplies, power distribution units that I could turn on and off because they had default passwords. I actually found 2 defibrillators that for some reason were on the network, along with a bunch of things that had network names that led me to believe that they were operating theater equipment.
Right.
That, you know, that has been going on for years and years and years. The difference now is that more and more of that equipment is making its way onto the Internet. Curtis, I want to throw you in here. This is one of those things where maybe us geeks kind of overpromised to the CTO and the CIO when we said, oh, we can get all of these devices online and we can get all of this data and it will be fantastic and it will be good. And now we're kind of having to backtrack and say, yes, those devices are great, but we need to protect them behind our firewalls. In fact, we might even need to protect them from the other devices on our network. Is this something that you hear a lot in Information Week Radio? When you talk to executives, do they understand how much vulnerability they can be bringing into their network?
I think that some of them do, and I think that for many of them, it's almost an instinctive thing. They understand that when you put more devices on the network, it obviously creates more opportunities for a vulnerability to exist. And as for the IT departments, you know, as you say, we promised that we could put all these devices on the net, and we did. We get the information from them. They scarf up data, send it back to be analyzed. Good on us. But now we're understanding that some more thought really should have gone into the architecture of those networks. We need to segment networks out much better than we have been doing. And this goes in everything from hospitals, where the situation was as you described, to automobiles. I mean, let's think about the number of car hacking scenarios that we've seen demonstrated where the real problem is that the vehicle control network and the entertainment network are the same network. A simple division of those networks could solve a lot of problems. So what we're seeing now is the evolution of the networking infrastructure to build architectures that are inherently more secure. They keep things that are separated by function on different networks with protected gateways between them for the data that must flow. It's much more intelligent, requires more thought, but now that we have all of these very, very smart devices out there, it's thought we simply must put into the whole project.
Tim, let me bring that to you because that makes sense. Yes, we must start thinking about that. In fact, we just had a big conference here in the Silicon Valley where we had a couple of federal agents come out and say, look, I understand that you all want to be inventors. I understand you all love the fact that you're part of a startup, but security needs to be part of the first processes that you do, not something that you add on after release 3. But that doesn't help us with all the equipment that's currently in the field. I'm thinking specifically of the case that you found when you start looking at security cameras, especially network-attached security cameras. Most of that gear is very specialized. It's very expensive. Yep. So I don't see a lot of businesses looking at ripping out a $100,000 installation to fix security issues that shouldn't have existed in the first place.
It's a big problem, and there are about 250 million of these cameras in the world, so it's not a small problem. The best we can do for installed devices is appeal to the contractors who are out there maintaining them, and at least please change the default access credentials to something harder to mount a dictionary attack against. That's minimally what we can do. And then we've got to work with the manufacturers to have a stronger form of authentication. And if you do need remote access for people maintaining these networks, they've got to have some better protocols to be able to access them securely.
Right. Chee, I'm not going to mention any names, so please don't mention any names. They've gotten much better since then. But I do remember when we were putting a lot of cameras around Interop. We found a vulnerability in one of them, a very popular camera manufacturer, very expensive gear, very good gear. But I remember they had an authentication page, which looked good. But if you actually knew the address for the page after the authentication page, you could just jump there, which was amazing since it was the same for every camera they ever manufactured.
Yeah, it was hilarious. After we got through cringing, we all started laughing, and then very, very quickly started writing emails to our friends at that manufacturer.
Right.
This is not rocket science. This is not hard. Does not take a lot of CPU cycles. It actually doesn't even take that long to implement. That particular manufacturer was using a version of Linux. They could have used a stripped-down version of pfSense in there. This is not tough to do. And the fact that a lot of these Internet of Things platforms don't even have encrypted logins. The acceptable use policy at the University of Hawaii is thou shalt not use any unencrypted login. It is a policy of the Internet too. Why have the Internet of Things platforms not adopted this? It's, in my mind, almost criminal.
Tim, what about it? Why haven't they adopted that?
I think it comes down to economics. It's cheaper just to get these things out there, prototype them quickly, as you mentioned. Also, quite often, these are not devices that are purchased by a security team. They're purchased by, a small business owner, maybe at best a facilities owner, who may not even be aware of some of these issues. So the buyer of these devices, especially in the case of a home consumer, isn't demanding security. And so there's no economic reason for the manufacturers to build security in. As big of a problem as it is, their customers aren't asking them to solve that problem for them, unlike servers or routers or other things that we naturally expect security technology to be built into.
That's interesting. Their customers aren't asking them to fix it. And I actually think it's because those devices are still doing what they were supposed to do.
Right.
If you've got a CCTV camera system, even if it has been owned and it's attacking other computers, you're probably not noticing that. You're seeing a hit on your externals, but it's still sending video. You're still recording it on your DVR. So they've got to be thinking, well, if it does what I want it to do, I really don't care what's happening outside of that function.
That's right. The same for your DVR, the same for your nanny cam. You know, any device that's functioning as usual, as far as you're concerned as a consumer, is doing its job and what you paid for it.
Curtis, this used to be something that would be handled by one of the big publications. IT publications that you and Chee have both worked for have done extensive testing on security. In fact, I remember Chee, one of my favorite things to watch Chee do is when he would hook up a bunch of products, be it cameras or firewalls, and then hook up a monster vulnerability generator and just throw everything at it and see what would break it. We don't see that, especially in today's startup culture. It's all about the features, all about the promise. And as long as it does the promise thing, everything else falls away. How does an individual, or even how does a small business test their devices to make sure that they're not going to be leaking?
That's a really good question, and I'm not sure that there's a really good answer because, I mean, Brian and I have cooperated on writing a bunch of those big stories. I have been at his elbow while he was running those tests. The thing is, they're expensive. Once you start putting a lot of products together to test and getting those big bad packet generators humming, you're talking a lot of money. And the fact is that even while it was going on in the print publications, it was a really expensive way to fill a page with type and illustrations. Today, very close to no one can still do that. There are a couple of pubs that are still doing it in an organized way, but not many. So what is a company or a consumer to do? The answer that is the best that I have found is turn to community. Find user groups, find maker spaces, find communities of technology-minded individuals and draw upon their expertise. You know, one person today can probably only test 1 or 2 devices. But if you get 500 people together, the odds become much better that they can put some testing into most of the devices you would consider. It's not perfect, and it's not nearly as consistent as we would like. But in today's market reality, I think that these communities are going to take on greater and greater importance as we try to figure out what's going on with all of the devices flooding onto the market.
We've got some really good conversations going on in the chat room. Works is talking about the shortest time to market. And yeah, that's what we're living by now. Security is an afterthought if you can get your product to market a week, a month, a year before your competitor. We've also got HighWeb talking about, well, you just need to hire a pen tester. That's what you were talking about, Curtis. You need to have someone who can actually do the dirty work. But Chee, you've got experience with this. You've got a lot of experience with this. And pen testing is not cheap.
No, pen testing isn't cheap, but the tools are less expensive now. You know, we've had different people on the show talking about things. Metasploit's a great tool. You can automate some of the pen testing. Ixia and Spirent, two of the big giant test equipment vendors, now have software versions of their testing system. When I did the firewall tests, the scripting that I used was based on Mu Dynamics, which is bought by Spirent Corporation, and it was just some of the other testers that work, the automations, they were just lack of imagination. It's like, come on, test from both inside and outside. The scenario was, little Joey brings an infected laptop and plugs into dad's office. I think some of it is just looking at the situation and trying to put yourself in the shoes of someone trying to do you harm, and just do some light testing. Talk to the Ixia guys. If you've got devices that you want to make sure is running, go and talk to Ixia about getting the software version and just at least do some real light vulnerability testing. The problem is vendors aren't buying ads. The magazines don't have as many pages that they can put up. This goes for web-based also. And without that, the magazines can't pay for people like me or Curtis to do large-scale tests. I've pretty much stopped doing large firewall tests because nobody wants to buy them anymore. Ad sales means I can write more, I can do more articles. I'm down to maybe 1 or 2 articles a month now because nobody wants to buy them.
I do want to throw in, you were talking about testing tools. Cobalt Strike, I have had a lot of fun with. And, of course, that was created by friend of the show, Raphael Mudge, Armored Touch Hacker on Twitter. Tim, a lot of this is coming down to, well, they're not going to solve this because it's not hitting them financially. And it doesn't hurt them to have their devices leaking packets out to the internet as long as it's not compromising their core security. And they don't consider their video cameras to be core security. So where do we go from this? Obviously, they don't have any incentive right now to rip out an installation of insecure Internet of Things devices and replace them with a more secure set of Internet of Things devices, even though we don't have them yet. But what has to happen before there is a financial incentive for them to take this seriously?
Yeah, I think that there are some organizations that do have the cloud. So the U.S. government, for example, for all of its equipment, for its commercial buildings, the non-military, could require the same kind of security precautions it requires for computer software on servers or PCs. For example, large companies who buy a lot of this equipment, whether it's cameras or other kinds of interconnected devices, could demand that certain security protocols are met. People who are involved in, building networks could begin to demand this. And if the manufacturers are seeing the demand from these large consumers who are buying hundreds or thousands of these devices, hopefully it might trickle down to the, small business owners or the people who don't have a big IT staff. I think also, having your CCTV network operator require it to do a scan, put it into the contract, ask them how often they do a pen test of their own network. Those kinds of contractual obligations can begin to make it commercially uncomfortable not to begin to hear the demands of companies. I think it's got to come from those big organizations, whether it's the government buying power or contractual obligations on the part of consumers and the vendors they choose.
Yeah, I think this is a discussion about taking installation and deployment past the stage of it works to it works and it's secure. We haven't quite made it to that last part yet. We can get it working, but not all of us check to make sure that it's working the way it's supposed to.
Exactly.
Yeah. Tim, I want to give you the last word here because we are winding down. Unfortunately, we have a hard out, so we have to end the show on time, which is strange. What bit of wisdom would you like to give to our audience as they are looking at installations, as they are looking at the deployment of new equipment? What should they look for? Right? What kind of assurances can they have that equipment that they buy will not just fall into the Internet of Things free-for-all?
Yes, I think that people should look for equipment that has some level of testing performed on it. I would look at the default credentials. That is, the age-old Achilles heel for these kinds of attacks. So understand what they've done to harden it, if they can, the remote access and login. I would also say, there are ways to scan your network and find out, what's coming in and out of your network. And so either you can do it or your provider can do it and look at what's happening. Find out how many bots or botnets are operating inside or trying to hit your network and, get a reality check, I think is the first thing you need to do.
Reality check. I love it. That's Tim Matthews, the VP of Marketing at Imperva. We want to thank you very much for joining us again on This Week in Enterprise Tech. We're going to have you back, and hopefully we don't wait a year to have you back. I mean, I literally think it was like 1 year. It was like 53 episodes ago.
I think you're right.
Yeah. So
I'll try and come back with some good news next time.
Yes, please. Could you? Because we could use them. In fact,
I'll try.
What I'd like to, maybe in a month, we could have you back and tell us that the Internet of Things has been sorted, and we can all just go back to our work.
It might take 6 weeks, but I'll happy to be back.
Fantastic. And could you please tell the folks where they can find you, where they can find Imperva, where they can go if they want to find out more of the research that you do on these issues?
Absolutely. So if you go to the Encapsula blog, which is part of Imperva, which is incapsula.com, look at the blog. You'll find a lot of information about the research we've done, about botnets, ways to protect yourself. So I highly recommend giving it a look if you're concerned about your networks being compromised.
It's Tim Matthews, again, the VP of Marketing for Imperva. We thank you for being on This Week in Enterprise Tech.
Thanks, guys.
Well, folks, You did it again. You used up another hour listening to the best dang enterprise podcast in the world. That's according to 9 out of 10 compromised CCTV cameras. I want to thank everyone who makes this show possible, but most of all, my co-hosts. Let's start with you, Chee. You've been a busy, busy man. I know that you're still working on the smart grid project on one of your neighboring islands. I know you've got smart bits. I know you have a project over the weekend, but I hear you're going to be making a trip to the Bay Area soon.
Yes, I'm actually just waiting on trying to get my travel paperwork done. You know, got to dot those I's and cross those T's. But actually what I really want to do at this end is do a shout out to the guys like Chumley and Scatteron and Sergeant Shafto. We were chatting about, gee, why don't we have some sort of standard so that you know you can trust the device? And I will say, I have tried several times. I actually tried to start up a working group in the IETF, and I actually had the backing of Mu Dynamics and Ixia and Spirent. Unfortunately, it just never happened. Maybe as time goes on, maybe we start needing to do a consortium of security vendors and start putting together some sort of way of having something readily identifiable to the consumer that they know it's actually been tested.
We have a consortium. It's called the Twiat Riot. Let's just use that.
Yeah, why not?
And, of course, I want to thank Curtis Franklin from Information Week Radio. Curtis, thank you for making the difficult call from your hotel. Actually, it held up. This is probably the best hotel Wi-Fi you've had in a very long time.
I'm very impressed, and I will mention it to management. It's a very good thing, so I'm pleased.
What's next for you? I mean, I understand you have a lot of interesting topics coming on Information Week Radio, and you're traveling quite a bit. But where will we find you next week?
Well, it's going to be interesting because one of the things we're doing is in preparation for the new year, we're getting ready to launch a number of new radio shows at Information Week, those dealing with both management issues and technology issues. So we've got a lot of that going on. Follow me on Twitter at KG4GWA. We'll have more details and pointers to places where you can go off and see all kinds of things about these new shows. I think some of them are going to be really exciting, lots of fun stuff to do, and we're actually turning them into podcasts as well. So we're cranking up all kinds of audio goodness over at Information Week Radio.
Chee Curtis, thank you so very much. Now, we will not have an episode next week because we're going to be in a tryptophan coma. At least I will be in a tryptophan coma. Will the two of you be celebrating Thanksgiving in your own special way?
Yeah, I'm looking at maybe a 20-pound turkey.
Ooh.
Maybe something in that range.
Well, but then what will Kathy eat?
The brumpa.
And you, Curtis, what will you be up to?
We're actually going to be spending it with a bunch of people we've never met before, coming down to spend it with our son and his partner and the partner's family. So it should be an entertaining and very enjoyable Thanksgiving. I will say I've got to give a shout out to my boy Daniel, because he actually has graduated with his Bachelor of Science degree. So this coming week, we're going to be taking him out to have a celebratory dinner with him. It's been a long time coming, but he made it through, and I'm one proud dad.
Oh, congratulations. Proud dad indeed. Oh, and by the way, next week, if any of you are in Las Vegas, I will be there with my family. I think I'm going to be doing a couple of hours at the St. Francis St. Viator Food Kitchen. So if you want to stop by and help some people in need, I'd love to see you there. Also, thanks to everyone who is watching us right now. It's not just the co-hosts and the guests who make This Week in Enterprise Tech a lot of fun. It's all of you, especially those who jump into the chat room. And you can always watch us live on Fridays at 1:30 p.m. Pacific time by going to live.twit.tv. As long as you're watching us live, jump into the chat room at irc.twit.tv, and you can give me feedback. I actually read the chat room as the show goes. It's a great place to get questions. It's a great place to interact. It's a great place to get your particular issues addressed by our guest. Don't forget, you can follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/PadreSJ. If you have an idea for a future show or a guest who you'd like to see on Twiat, that's where you go. Again, twitter.com/PadreSJ. patreon.com/Padre SJ. Of course, thanks to the people in the Brick House who make this show possible, to Lisa and Leo for letting us do Twiet, to Karsten, my super producer, and of course, to my TD, the man who really holds it all together, the cranky hippo, Mr. Brian Burnett. What do you do here at Twit TV?
Well, clearly I'm pushing the buttons on this show, but when I'm not doing that, we do a how-to show. Thursdays, know-how. We had fun yesterday doing the Raspberry Pi Wonderland episode. So if you've ever been interested in doing a MAME machine with your Raspberry Pi, check out yesterday's know-how.
Absolutely. Until next time, I'm Father Robert Ballecer, and I'm just reminding you that if you want to know what's going on in the enterprise, just keep quiet.